Hello and welcome to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging field of data science. We bring the best minds in data, software engineering, machine learning and artificial intelligence. Now here are your hosts, Frank Lavinia and Andy Leonard.
Hello and welcome back to Data Driven, the show where we explore the emerging fields of data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. If you like to think of data as the new oil, then you can consider us Car Talk, because we focus on where the rubber meets the virtual road. And with me, as always, on this epic trip down the information superhighway is everybody's favorite data philosopher, Andy Leonard. How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing well, Frank. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing much better than I did when we last spoke.
Yeah?
Yep, I've rebuilt my site as much as I can. I did find an archive of probably about 12 to 18 months of posts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is good. The only problem is that they're all in individual files.
Oh.
And I have two options. I have the option of kind of doing it kind of by the brute force way.
Right.
Or automating it. But it's at that cusp. You know what I mean?
I do.
Where it's just enough data where, if it was 2-3 years, like, yeah, obviously it makes sense. But it's just enough to say, should I even bother trying to automate it? Or should I just,
Just click the button. What would that be? Let's see, 18 months at the rate you've been posting the past 18 months. That's a lot of posts. That's close to 500, I would guess.
I think it is. I actually have a spreadsheet where I track all this stuff.
Wow.
And let's see, 2017 count 847. So.
Wow.
And then 585 for 2016. So I mean, maybe it's not on the cusp after all.
That sounds like a good candidate for some automation, Frank.
It certainly does. Maybe I'll look into see how it's possible. Now that because I use Windows Live Writer or Open Live Writer, and they've open sourced that,
right.
So it's possible the file specification is available. That still would be a pretty big work though, and it's one of those things where do I focus on the future or do I focus on even the recent past is still the past? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a hard call.
Yeah. So that drama is still unfolding. Speaking of which, I don't want to turn this into a bash ClearDB show, although I am sorely tempted to do so. Looks like they took down somebody else's site without warning.
Oh.
Yeah.
Darn it.
Yeah. And I sent him my condolences and a link to the previous episode where we recorded it, kind of like as it just happened. So. Right.
That's kind of sad. And upon reflecting, I think I even tweeted this, everything else, you take everything else off the table, and there's a lot on the table. They should not have deleted your backups. That's like the dumbest thing ever.
Yeah. I mean, I would have been more than happy to pay them the money, even though it was a free service, but that's a whole other can of worms. I would have been happy to get the data back, but, alas, they deleted everything. So at least they were thorough, right?
Yes. Give them an E for effort.
I give them an E for effort. There's a few other letters I would give them, but let's keep that iTunes rating that we have.
Let's do that.
So we actually there's a lot going on, both Frank's world and Andy's world.
Yes.
So you may have noticed the posts have kind of slowed down. We are still doing the show. We're still very much enthused and excited about the show. It's just that crunch time has happened, and it's actually not the first crunch time we've had in our careers. It's just this is the first time we've had it when we didn't have a backlog of like a month and a half of posts.
Right. So, and I mean, on top of that, there's a lot of tragedy out there with the wildfires and the earthquake in Mexico. And the 3 hurricanes that came through. I don't want to make light of any of it. I promise I'm not. But we actually got impacted by Hurricane Irma. Our guest for last week lives in Miami, and she had to evacuate the day we were going to record. I think she made the right call, evacuating versus doing the show. And so, we missed a week, but I'm okay with that because if you look at what's happened this week since then, this is Tuesday, the 26th of September, and right now the Microsoft Ignite conference is going on down in Orlando. And yesterday, I was trying to keep up with the guests that have appeared on Data Driven that were doing keynotes and delivering content there and doing interviews and such. And I've counted 3. So,
and we're only on day 2 of the event. So I was like, it was kind of funny. It was kind of like I was playing like need it, got it, need it, got them. Like we had them on the show, we need them on the show. But I was impressed with the caliber of guests that we've had and their stature within the community. I mean, it's like we've had some legends on the show. I mean, Rima,
yeah,
Kamal.
Yeah.
Kamal, he has a really awesome presentation. Was it Intelligence in the Age of Data or something like that?
Yeah, I'd have to go look at the site, but it was or BI, something to do with BI and the age of AI. Very interesting presentation, and he did like most of the I'd call them the leads on the keynotes. He had a lot of people come out and do demonstrations, and they were pretty cool demos on the first afternoon of the conference. But yeah, I was doing the same thing. There was a lot of people out there that I was saying, "Hey, we need to get her on the show. We need to get him." And we've already had him. Buck Woody did an interview this morning with Catherine Wilhelmsen, who is an MVP roaming reporter there.
Nice.
And Catherine's actually a friend and a co-author on the Bemmel book. She is a Bemmel hero as well.
So we totally have to get her on the show.
Well, yeah, she's just awesome. So yes, we do. She's traveling an awful lot between. I think like this month, she's away from home. We're home in the Nordic countries, and yeah, she's going to be away. We've got a lot coming up. I mean, this is conference season, as you know, Frank. So you just spent some time, I believe, earlier today at a mini conference, I suppose. Now, why don't you share some about what you learned there?
It was awesome. I was at the Alexa Dev Day, which is, not surprisingly, very patterned after the Microsoft Dev Days of old. And I say not surprisingly because a lot of the people who orchestrated that while they were at Microsoft are now at Amazon.
Oh,
and so they have a great traveling show where they get a conference room in a hotel, and they talk about how to develop for Alexa, and it's pretty amazing. It's a lot easier than the documentation made it look, because when I first looked at it, I was like, okay, there's like 2 or 3 moving parts, and once you kind of see somebody walk through it, it's very easy. But so it was great. I actually have a skill that I built this morning, and I haven't published it yet, but I suspect to do that soon. But it's really cool because you can actually simulate a Echo, and you can actually test it like there. And there's also a page. Hopefully, maybe I'll get to do a online course about it, like a Wintellect Now course.
Okay.
Speaking of which, Andy, you know this, but our listeners may not. I created a Wintellect Now course on basically teaching data science for developers. And Jeff Precise, the CEO of Wintellect Now, has decided to make it free for a limited time. So we'll push that link in there, and you can check it out. So you can see kind of some of my special effects kung fu, as well as some of my data science kung fu, which was it was really fun to use the 2 things I'm passionate about on the same project. That was really cool.
Well, I got to watch the video, and I have to recommend it to our listeners. It is a really well done video. You know, Frank, you have an obvious passion for this, and that shows through. And what I found was, although I learned some really cool stuff as you were walking through this, and it was elementary type intro to data science type stuff, I still picked up a couple things. But what kept me really engaged was that passion.
Yeah, and it's fun to be able to kind of combine my passion for kind of video production and data science like in one thing. It was like, and I mean that's it's also cool because I mean that's basically the whole point of this show is to assist people who are working as developers or kind of in the traditional data fields, and expose them to data science.
Absolutely, yeah, and we do that by bringing a stellar cast of guests. The guests we've had recently have been great. Julie was awesome, Julie Smith, and just a lot of really good folks that we've had recently. So.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad we're obviously most of the people that we want to talk to are presenting at, at Ignite, but there's a lot of cool announcements coming out of Ignite. Did you see the thing about the quantum computing?
Yeah, that blew my mind. I actually watched that keynote as it was streamed live. And just the fact that they put that panel on that stage, I think was just very symbolic of where Microsoft's at, where their head's at. Satya and the team, and how they're thinking. And it was kind of cool, I thought, too, when they tried to reveal the model and it wasn't there. Of course, if you can determine the location of the quantum computer,
yeah, that's right. You can either know where it is or,
how fast it's moving. Yeah. So apparently the Heisenberg principle kicked in and it wasn't there when they first revealed it. It was a little bit of a physics joke, I thought. So
I also liked when, I forget his name, but he presented the little chipboard to Satya.
Yeah.
For his office. He says, you can have it in your office, but don't look at it.
You may not be able to see it if you look at it.
Right. You'll ruin the computer if you look at it. And that's actually something I'd love to get as a physicist on the show to kind of explain quantum computing and kind of how that works, because it's you can kind of explain it in an elementary way where the rules in quantum physics are not how we would perceive the world. And there's actually a great explainer video that I linked to on franksworld.com. Where they kind of talk about that. But basically, instead of having the notion of being a 1 or a 0, you can have a qubit or a quantum bit that can be 1 and 0.
Exactly.
And there's I still have a lot of questions about kind of like, well, what does that mean exactly? How do you program a quantum thing where you don't really know what the results are, or you come up with all results at once? It just seems there's definitely clearly something I'm missing.
Well, it's counterintuitive. It really is. Right. And as they announced at Ignite yesterday, they have a programming language that, and I thought this was fascinating. They're getting people ready to program quantum computers before they exist, at least in the mainstream. So they've got a language based on C#. And you see them doing things like, declaring qubits, and it was
right.
And I'm like you. I don't understand I certainly don't understand the math behind quantum computing. And I don't understand the physics behind it either. I know bits and pieces of it. I can crack jokes about Heisenberg with the best of them. But if you ask me to sit down and explain quantum computing to you, I don't think I could do it. I do know this, that it takes just a handful of qubits to emulate the amount of memory that we have in megabytes, gigabytes, and maybe even terabytes. I mean, it's not an awful lot of memory required in the number of qubits to reproduce the amount of memory that we would need to do something, say, at the terabyte level.
Right. It is a quantum leap, if you will.
Yes. But it was interesting. Somebody, I won't repeat it, but somebody quoted a tweet from a competitor to Microsoft in the data space that said something like, we have this now and that, which is something Microsoft's had for years. And then underneath that, they said, the Microsoft quote back was, great, we're working on quantum computers.
Yeah, it's interesting. there was actually another interesting video online where they did it was billed as an unboxing of a quantum computer.
Interesting.
And it really wasn't, because it basically they needed, the quantum computer was actually relatively small. Mm-hmm. It was just the cooling units to keep it at a temperature where it would work.
Oh, I see.
Were 100 times bigger than it. So like he showed you, like, well, he opened the door kind of in a dramatic fashion and it was like, hey, is this the quantum computer? No, this is a cooling unit. Oh. Is this? No, this is the backup cooling unit. And then a couple of things to that, then he actually shows you where the quantum computer was.
Oh, okay.
It was pretty cool, actually. It was interesting. I think it was D-Wave. D-Wave has made a few. But I think it's interesting that this came about now in terms of in the time of the cloud, if you will, because no one for the foreseeable future is going to have a quantum chip inside their next desktop or laptop,
right,
or phone. You know, it makes sense for the near term to have that in the cloud.
Well, sure, you're going to need a really big fan to keep it at 4 Kelvin.
Right, and that's cold. But yeah, so I mean, it has some interesting potential. I know that one of the things it can do is factor prime numbers faster than we've ever been able to do that before.
Interesting.
Which can wreak all kinds of havoc for encryption.
That's true.
If you'll be able to break keys that would normally take, decades or centuries, potentially in minutes.
Wow.
If not instantaneously. Of course, at the quantum level, I guess, what is time, really?
True.
There was rumors of circling around, because I live in the D.C. area. The NSA published a recommendation for updating encryption standards. And whenever they publish anything, everyone kind of looks around at each other. It's like, well, what do they know that? And one of the speculation that came out was, this was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and they said, well, somebody, if I can find the article, I'll put it in the show notes, was basically said something to the effect of, maybe this is in preparation for quantum computing, and they expect some kind of breakthrough in the next 5 to 10 years.
Interesting.
And, certainly what we've seen kind of, announcing that they have a quantum computer, and now they're starting to, there's an emulator in Visual Studio that could be very interesting.
Yeah, totally agree.
And you have to assume that some state-sponsored organizations probably already have working quantum computers by now, or some fashion thereof. Very fascinating tech. In fact, one of the things that was really amazing about Ignite. So Ignite is the rebrand, the gritty, not the gritty, but it's the reimagining, I guess, of tech ed.
Yes.
And it really feels like a completely different Microsoft. And I know that's like the hip thing to say, right? Everything that they do is completely different than before.
Right.
But I mean, it's definitely much more future focused, because tech ed was always historically about, the future focused stuff was done at PDC, mm-hmm. Professional Developers Conference, and then the existing stuff, tech ed was meant for implementers today, the enterprise type folks.
Right.
Whereas now I think those lines are blurred, much more so than they had been, and I'm really eager to get my hands on some of the live streaming sessions and watch all of them.
Yeah, well, I think the reason the lines are blurred is, we're certainly seeing the technology, the pace of technology release accelerate. And I was trying to describe it earlier to my older son, and I was telling him, it used to kind of go along at a nice, easy little clip. It was just straight line, but it was trending upwards. And I said, now it's getting a little bit more of an acceleration to it. It's looking exponential. And it makes me wonder, just based on the stuff that I saw in the keynotes, is it going geometric? I don't know. It may.
It's definitely, I can totally see that. I mean, if you look at, the whole push for DevOps, and continue, the continuous integration. I mean, I think a lot of that speaks to the fact that in the past you only had to speak to, the integration folks like once or twice a year.
Right.
If you spoke to them once a quarter, that was a lot.
Right.
Now that integrations happen in large part thanks to things being web-based and cloud-based, I mean, you could have theoretically an implementation every hour, and there's probably even more iterations than that, although you probably get a point of diminishing returns in terms of practicality.
That's true, but the more code automation that we see, the more auto generation and that sort of stuff. I don't know, Frank. I mean, we might see literal continuous integration in our lifetimes.
I can see that. I mean, technically, and there's no reason why you couldn't do it. The only thing I question is, okay, at what point does it become meaningless? Or, it's one thing to say that you're running, this, the build that was deployed this week versus the build that was deployed 5 minutes ago or 15 minutes ago.
True.
I think there's a limit. There's an upper limit. It has nothing to do with the technology. I think it has more to do with kind of the practical things of, this crashed on me. Well, what build are you using? Well, I tried it like 5 minutes ago. I'll try it again, I think that's a good thing because, things should get fixed faster. But I also think that it could be confusing.
That's true. Well, Frank, how I like to pick on people who work at Microsoft a little bit for the way they speak their own language, right?
Mm-hmm.
They use ask as a noun, for instance.
Yes. What is your specific ask?
That's it. So, but I have to say, I'm super excited about something that was released at Ignite yesterday. They announced SSIS as a service.
Yeah. So what is that now? Sassafras? Sissis?
We're getting close to sassafras, I think.
Sassafras.
So yes, SSIS as a service. It's in public preview, and this is kind of an idea that one of our earlier guests, he didn't mention it on the show, but we've been batting this back and forth for half a decade. Is this idea that Microsoft could put data integration in the cloud with SSIS? If they wanted to. There's some limitations to running the current version of SSIS that every enterprise runs in the cloud, and that is that there's a requirement that there's a relational engine license on the machine where SSIS executes. So you could run in the development environment all day long and everything's just fine. But as soon as you try to schedule a package execution, say using a SQL agent job, that's when things get a little hairy. That engine goes and checks to see, is there a relational engine license here? So, Microsoft made a pretty big deal out of this, and I think it's true that SSIS is free. You buy SQL Server, you get SSIS. But I like to describe it as free, and I'm doing the quotey signs in the air here. It's free. But if they run it as a service, I imagine they've got to, they've either disabled that piece or what. And it's some very interesting opportunities, I think, there. For instance, the data flow pipeline is an asynchronous engine. And it's kind of just begging for something like REST,
Right.
So it's kind of already ready. And it's been that way, Frank, for 12 years. I've been screaming about this, hey, make.
So they finally listened to your feedback?
No, I'm sure they didn't. I'm sure they ran out of other stuff to think of, and they finally thought, well, hey, what about that? You remember that old FedEx commercial where everybody's sitting around the boardroom and some engineer says, hey, we could use FedEx. And then everybody kind of sitting there still thinking, and the boss says, I know, we'll use FedEx.
Yes.
And it's like, that's me. I'm that guy. Anyway, no, I think it's a great idea. I'm sure I wasn't the only person to see that and kind of put that together. And
right.
So Kevin Hazard should be happy. In fact, I need to send him that link. I'm sure he's seen it by now, but another of our former guests, Julie Smith, actually sent me the link and said, hey, check this out. Azure Data Factory version 2 is coming out, and it's going to do a whole bunch of really cool stuff. And that was one of them.
That's really cool. It's also interesting to note how focused this Ignite has been on data.
Yeah.
I mean, it's data everywhere. Now, my first thought was, well, maybe that's just me because, now all I see is data. But there's hardly any mention of client kind of dev or anything like that, at least so far. I mean, it's still going on. But I think the focus on data is very telling in terms of the state of the industry and the state of Microsoft.
It absolutely is. And, I'm no expert on people or anything, but one thing that I've noticed in the few times I've heard Satya speak is he signals, he's pretty good about telegraphing where things are going. And I actually made notes while I was listening yesterday on the 25th. And he started by talking about mixed reality, which is, I guess, the Microsoft terminology for augmented reality. And that's fine. We don't need to get into a contest over trademarks and terminology. But they mentioned mixed reality, graph, AI first was another one. And then there was a bunch of talk around business application automation, focusing on dynamics and integration with Office 365, a big push on apps and infrastructure and how data and AI enable that. And, it's, and then, of course, the panel on quantum computing. And so those were kind of that was the list of things that I hit, the topics that I wrote down listening to Satya's talk. And, that's interesting, especially I think the one that caught my mind and we haven't talked about too much yet is AI first. I heard that a few times.
Yeah. I think a lot like the 90s where it was put the web everywhere. I think now there's an emphasis in terms of making applications smarter by putting AI everywhere.
That fits. I mean, that fits. And they've built the infrastructure in such a way that it's just begging for integration.
Right.
And so that's something I've said this on the show before. Microsoft gets very little credit for how well they do systems integration and platform integration, but they do that extremely well. I would venture to say they do that better than any other company their size.
Yeah, I could say that. I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah. So
what's interesting too was the continual use of the term data estate.
I heard that too, and that was the first time I'd heard that phrase.
Yeah, me too. And they kept saying, "Take care of your data estate," and it's funny because it's almost like it's very serendipitous. Like I subscribe to Curiosity Stream. I think I was telling you about this.
Yeah.
And Curiosity Stream is basically Netflix for nerds. It's all documentaries, all science stuff. There's actually we don't have an affiliate relationship with them, unfortunately, but they are good enough that I would recommend them as if we did, because they have really good documentaries about data. There's one called The Joy of Data, which is an excellent show, and then there's The Human Face of Data, and there's a number of other ones too. I mean, my sons love it because there's stuff about dinosaurs and things like that.
Cool.
But there's actually a series of documentary, and I think the presenter from that is a professor at Columbia who was also presented one of the classes for the data science cert. I recognize his name. He looks a little different because it's like 10 years ago. But so the context is called The Ascent of Money. In the context of the documentary series, it's 4 shows, I think. And it basically happened, they recorded it just as the financial markets were imploding. And they were taking kind of a long view of, well, how did we get here? And it was very fascinating where they talked about kind of the rise of power of the mercantile class.
Right.
And kind of in the last, the what we would call the Industrial Revolution, you had the landed gentry, and then land was power. right? Because you grew food on it, and that was basically, whoever owned the land was the lord of the kingdom or the lord of the fiefdom.
Right.
And that continued from the Middle Ages, at least in Europe, until, probably mid-1800s. And then there was a point where a lot of these aristocratic types basically spent more than they were earning because the prices of agriculture was going down with advancements in that technology. And they just did not adjust or adapt. And then it ended up being that bankers were kind of on the rise. And I think that's interesting that they call it the data estate because, of course, estate is usually where, these people would live. And it was the land. It was, that was their main means of income.
Right.
And I think it's interesting to note that, we went from kind of the landed gentry to, as part of an agricultural economy, to more of a capital-based economy with banking,
Right.
To now are we in the midst of another shift from kind of money as power to information and data as power. And I thought the use of that data estate was a very curious turn of phrase.
I agree, Frank. And we know because we see these announcements coming out every day. We get to talk to people as part of this show who are on the cutting edge and doing amazing things. I think about our interview with Lynn Lange months ago, where she was talking about the stuff that's going on with data science applied to bioinformatics. And that's literally going to change the world. It is already. You got a really cool story in there about one guy whose life was saved by data science and bioinformatics.
Right.
And that we're going to see those kinds of impacts all around us. I'm sure there's going to be lots and lots of positive stories like that. But as you and I are both well aware, and as being engineers, paranoia is a skill actually in this field. We're trained paranoids, and when we think about the shift that's coming, it's the thing that worries me is the unknown side effects, the unforeseen negative consequences, and that sort of stuff. And we know they're out there, and we see people talking about things like the basic economy, being able to provide some level of I don't know the right term to use, but basically
universal basic income. Yeah,
that's the one. That
is fraught with a lot of. I think the intentions of people who promote that are well intentioned.
Yeah,
but that is fraught with so many problems with that. Yeah. I mean, you are essentially relying 100% on the state to take care of you.
Right.
And you can debate whether or not that's a good thing on and of its own. But I mean, at some point in the future, it's not hard to imagine that, we use facial recognition, and Mr. Jones, you showed up at this protest. If you have the means to do this, then or vice versa, you didn't show up at this rally,
right?
And that's basically. That's inviting it because you're basically taking away people's ability to support themselves.
Right.
And not that people could support themselves in defiance of the state so much, but it makes you wholly dependent on the state as opposed to partially dependent.
But I see this, I really see this as a reaction to the automation that we see going on around us and, the threat to middle income jobs. And, and it's certainly as the robots get better at actuating the lower income jobs, the McDonald's has fewer people here in Farmville because they've got the machine that does the drinks for you automatically. And that's right. A robot. The Walmart needs less people at checkout because they've got the self-checkout area now. And again, as I did in that data point up at Inner Harbor, Maryland, when I looked at the parking machine, the parking attendant, if you will,
right.
The robots are not going to look like what movies have portrayed. They're going to look like these automated kiosks and the checkout line and the drink machine at McDonald's. Those are the ones coming
right.
for jobs, and they're knocking jobs off. They're picking them off one at a time to do that. So. I think that's why someone's looking at, people are thinking about, all right, so what do we do? How do we take care of these people that, aren't going to be able to find work? What do we do for them?
Well, and the other thing is, too, is, what's the tax structure going to look like in the future? I mean, let's pretend robots do everything. And you provide people with a universal basic income. Where does that money come from? Are you taxing the robots?
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think
it's kind of. I mean, at some point, though, I don't think that people have really worked out what that's going to look like. At some point, isn't it like, you're plugging in an extension cord into itself? Like, doesn't the money be meaningless at that point? Where it's like, well, what are you going to tax the robots? You're going to take the money away from the robots? Okay.
Well, yeah.
Like what? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work out. That'll be very interesting.
I agree with you.
I mean, just as kind of the rise of capital over the rise of the agricultural-based economy. Agriculture being the source of power, the rise of capital being power led to new philosophies of government, like communism probably being the most obvious in terms of its reaction against that.
Yeah.
I wonder what the reaction against what new economic models we're going to see in the next 50 to 100 years.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And what are the reactionary economic models? Because every economic model has winners and has losers.
Yeah.
Some have more winners, some have more losers.
Right.
If you look at kind of the history of the last 100 years, things didn't work out the way that the idealists and philosophers thought they would,
right,
at all. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting play because this level of disruption, literally changed the world the last time we saw it. And I think we're going to see that even more so now.
I agree. And I think we may see these gaps kind of closing, right? And how long it takes for the next level of disruption to take place. So there's an awful lot of pent-up demand, I think, for the automation that's making its way into the mainstream right now. And I look for that.
Ironically,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think ironically, a lot of the drive in fast food, that type of industry, is driven by the push for those workers to get more money.
Well, exactly.
So I was last fall, I was up in New Jersey, and I went to Quick Check, and it was this convenience store and chain based in New Jersey. And when I lived up there, I used to go there all the time. I was amazed when I walked in there, and there was basically one person working the entire store.
Huh.
Because everything was automated.
Wow.
Now, can I pin that directly on certain legislation that might have been in that jurisdiction about minimum wage laws? I can't directly prove it, but where those laws seem to go into place, the automation seems to happen faster.
Well, I agree with that, and I'm not trying to be morbid, and I'm definitely not trying to be political here. But if you think about what it is that's holding things back or keeping automation in check, automation can be expensive. But if you double the minimum wage, what you've done also at the same time is you've cut the barrier to automation in half.
Right.
At least that economic barrier. And
again, probably very well-intentioned people.
I completely agree. Yeah.
But, and that's the other thing, too, is now it's interesting, too, because you can kind of throw up your arms in the air and say, oh, it's over. Robots are going to take over the world. The other thing is somebody has to build those automated kiosks.
Exactly.
Someone has to write the software. Someone has to fix them. I think the problem, and I think we're seeing this pent up over many years, kind of falling apart, at least in the U.S., is we sent away a lot of our manufacturing jobs,
right,
which were kind of, I would call medium skill jobs.
Yep.
We, as Mike Rowe would say, we've sneered upon the tradesmen and tradeswomen, and we've glorified this notion of getting a college degree
as
the only way forward. And I think this is an unintended consequence of that. Sending everyone to college was a very noble thought, but the unintended consequence is, well, we've gotten rid of all our manufacturing jobs. So you really only have two types of jobs, low skill and high skill.
Yeah.
And that leaves a lot of people in the middle. You can always, I guess, skill down. It's easier to skill down than to skill up. So a lot of these folks are reliant on really low skilled jobs that they probably are overqualified for, but they're not qualified enough to be in a high skill job.
Yeah.
So we've kind of put ourselves like tangled in a pretzel position, and the answer is not to pull and keep doing more of the same. I mean, that's the definition of insanity, according to an old Chinese proverb. But here we are.
That's so true. And the way out, I think, is not the way we got in. I think the way out is going to be very, not only non-intuitive, but maybe counterintuitive. And I certainly don't have any answers about it. I've got mostly questions, but I think they're really good questions.
I think questions are good, though, because the questions help you question the status quo.
Yeah.
Because the status quo is, well, if Johnny makes, minimum wage and Johnny can't afford basic necessities on minimum wage, Johnny needs to, minimum wage needs to be raised, which is all, I can see that line of thinking, but the problem with that is that, if minimum wage, the 99-cent dollar menu, the dollar menu items are no longer going to be $1 if the cost of labor goes up artificially.
Right.
I don't know. I don't have the answers either. I just don't think that, how we got into this situation, like you said, is not how we're going to get out.
Yeah, we can't back out of this because you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
No, and this just says nothing about kind of the other things that AI is going to bring about in terms of, if you rely on AI to figure out crime or those sorts of things, there's all sorts of ethical problems with that in terms of how do the machine learning models get taught? What's the training data going to be on?
Right.
Are they going to draw assumptions that are not necessarily true?
Yeah.
It's lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Exactly. And you hear minds like Elon Musk worrying about, what happens with automation. I'm right there with him, and I'm not trying to just be paranoid about it. I already see, clients using the new shiny, machine learning, deep learning, and the like. And I saw them even before this, Frank, doing this with advanced business intelligence solutions. And now what you can do is you can put in, put in your guesses at the levers and the weights and the measures, and you fire it off and it builds you a report. Well, where before it may take you days or weeks to get the results, and now it takes you just seconds. And if those results are wrong and you're making decisions based on those, then that's one level of issues that can be dealt with. But what if the decision making is automated?
That to me crosses a very dangerous line.
Same here, and I think that's what Musk is talking about. I'm right there with him. It's the question of actuators, right? Now, Kevin Hazard, in some private offline conversations, that's his concern. He's like, what happens when we improve actuators? What happens when the machines can act on what they believe, on what they've decided in real life? And it's not that machines are evil. They're doing what they think they're actually doing exactly what they've been programmed to do. They're not thinking at all. We've put stuff in, and we are extremely fallible, Frank. If engineering teaches you nothing else, it teaches you just how fallible we are. I mean, Frank, you're a software developer, data scientist. When's the last time you wrote a line of code? Or let me put it this way, just realistically. When's the last time you wrote a dozen lines of code, pushed the play button in the development environment, and had it do exactly what you wanted it to do in every use case?
And when that does happen, I'm very suspicious of what did I not catch.
Yeah.
But the other thing, too, is that, and I don't think anyone has really kind of pondered this, is it's the Heisenberg Effect, right? Going back to the quantum thing, although this has nothing to do with quantum computing. So there was a cartoon going around, and it was basically a bunch of soccer players, football players for everyone in the rest of the world. And they were huddled up before a game, and they said, we have all this data and analytics about what they do based on the last 4 games that our opponent has played, so let's do this. Right? So it's kind of like the fact that you are aware of these patterns, does that change the patterns?
Wow.
Particularly in behavioral things, right? So if you did, say, sports team's a great example. If you knew that they were going to kick the ball in this situation, or pass it, or throw it, depending on the sport, in these situations, then you can prepare a defense against that, or you can alter that, or then it also becomes, well, that's what they're expecting us to do, so let's not do that. I mean, it's that already happens. I mean, a lot of these professional teams, they spend the time between games, reviewing videotapes and things like
Right.
that. But to have it automated and have it done in seconds as opposed to hours or weeks, I think changes the games, because you bring down that time of iteration.
Well, I don't know, Frank. I mean, let's kind of put this into another realm. Let's think about because you mentioned velocity, knocking things down to seconds from weeks or days, weeks or months. I mean, it's not like social media has impacted the way we treat each other and how we get along as a culture and society, right?
Or international relations.
Yeah,
No.
exactly. I mean, the velocity of communications, right? Without having that air gap and just something to,
Right.
just time. That's all that's changed really, is the amount of time. And yeah,
No, it's true.
I was being sarcastic.
So-
I apologize.
I figured. But I mean, it's just, these are just the interesting things that come up, and this is just 2 dudes talking.
Yeah.
And what happens when you get aboard, a round table of PhDs types, or Dr. Strangelove types,
Yeah.
planning things, both good and bad.
Sure.
What are they going to think up? You
Yeah.
know?
I mean, and it can be completely innocent. And this is exactly what we're talking about. And I think this is what Musk is worried about, and others, is the unintended consequences.
Yeah, and if I think Elon Musk has a good reason to be afraid,
Yeah.
and so do we all, actually.
I think so.
And that's a good title. We should call this show that. Elon Musk has very good reasons to be afraid of AI.
I think we have our time. I do.
Great.
Well, this was a good talk, Frank. I really enjoyed this. I'm sorry our
It
guest.
really was.
Sorry our guest was impacted by the hurricane, and I'm really glad we had a chance to get together. Something else has happened since we last chatted. I believe we've crossed the 20,000 downloads mark.
We have.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for listening to
And-
us.
And thank you for putting up with us in this recent kind of quiet time. It's been quite a rush, and we're certainly glad that our guest has survived the hurricane okay.
Yeah,
And
she did fine.
our thoughts and prayers go out to those in Puerto Rico for sure.
Absolutely.
And it's that's actually something I did a quick data point on, was data and disasters. As bad as these disasters are, we have the ability to kind of go back and analyze what happened and build stronger buildings, or talk about the Titanic data set being kind of the canonical thing on Kaggle
Yep.
for training data models.
Well, it's good for that sort of stuff, because we can learn from the past. That's definitely true. One of my heroes, Nassim Taleb, says we can't learn everything from the past. He keeps talking about black swans, and he has a new book coming out early next year, by the way. I
Really?
can't wait. He's been posting like screenshots of appendices and stuff on Twitter, and my goodness, I just reading a couple of pages gets me all giggly inside.
Black Swan is a great book.
It is. And, the way he talks about that, and all throughout Antifragile, I listened to the audiobook, re-listened to the audiobook a few months ago. And applying that thinking into data science, I think would do us a world of good. But he does not play the buzzwords game. And he's I don't know, he's a little rough around the edges, as we say in Farmville.
He is rough around the edges. Actually, so if his stuff's available as an ebook, then we have a surprise for folks, don't we?
We do. You can go subscribe to audible.com. You can do a free 30-day trial at thedatadrivenbook.com, and you can go listen to Antifragile just like I did by Nassim Nicholas Taylor. And it's a great book. And we highly recommend that you go check that book out and other books on data science. In fact, Frank, you recommended Lars Nielsen's book to me, Unicorns Among Us.
Yep.
That was about a year ago, I guess, and I listened to it.
I think so, yeah.
I listened to that book. It's a fantastic book, good overview of data science, about 2 hours on Audible. Thedatadrivenbook.com.
Yeah, definitely check it out. And if you subscribe from that, eventually we'll get a commission. And not only will you make your commutes more manageable and yourself smarter, but you'll help support the show.
Awesome.
It's a win-win situation.
I think so.
Cool. Well, thanks for listening. And be sure to be on the lookout for some new content, as we do have new guests lined up. And a few of them are on the Amazon ecosystem.
They are, and we won't say much more about that. Also, check out our mailing list. You go to datadriven.tv and become a data driver. We'd be happy to let you know ahead of everyone else who our guests are going to be.
Excellent. You folks have a great week.
Thanks for listening to Data Driven. Don't just listen. Become a data driver by going to datadriven.tv to sign up to join the community, access to special events, tips and tricks, and more. Sign up today at datadriven.tv.